Hello, historians! This is Note 6 for Unit 1, and the title is The Three Branches of Government. In your note-taking packet, you will find a page that looks like this, and there is a second page for Note 6 as well. So this is a little bit of a longer set of notes. The focus of this set of notes is to see how the writers of the Constitution were able to fulfill the idea of separation of powers so that the three branches of government would be powerful enough together to hold the country together, to hold the states together, but each one of them wouldn't have all of the power, so that it would be divided to avoid a situation where one would become all-powerful and start to take rights away from either the individuals or from the states. Another way to think about it is to look at this crown, and as the crown represents all of the power to hold the country together, that crown is broken up into three equal parts: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Go ahead and find this white box here in your notes. The first focus is going to be the legislative branch, which is the branch that makes laws. This branch is made up of Congress. That's the more informal word for the legislative branch. That's the word that you'll hear people use on the news or when they're talking about our representatives and our senators who work in Congress. Remember, we talked about the Great Compromise between the states that had a bigger population, who wanted representation based on population, and those states who wanted a smaller, or excuse me, who had a smaller population, who wanted representation that was equal from state to state. So that Great Compromise is how we came to have two houses in Congress. Now, each one of those, or I should say each one of the branches has a power or two over the other two branches. For example, the legislative branch has an ability to override a veto, which means that if the president vetoes a law, the Congress can go back and vote, and if they get a 2/3 majority, they can override that veto and pass the law without the president's approval. They can also impeach the president, which means that if they feel the president is doing something illegal, or if they feel that the president is doing something unconstitutional, they can bring a court case against the president, and if the president is found guilty, then they will have to leave office. Another power that the legislative branch has is over the judicial branch, where the Senate gets to confirm judicial appointments. The next branch we'll focus on is called the executive branch. I like to think of the executive as somebody who works in business with a suit and tie on. The person who makes up this branch is the president, and along with the vice president and the cabinet, this branch enforces the laws. So laws that are created by the legislative branch are then put into practice through the executive branch. Their power, the president's power over the judicial branch, is to appoint Supreme Court justices. So the president gets to look at all qualified people and decide on the one that he or she thinks is the best choice. And then, of course, it goes to the legislative branch for approval. The power over the legislative branch is that the executive branch, the president, gets to veto. That means that the president can receive a bill passed through Congress, but that doesn't mean that the president has to sign it. So until it is signed, it does not become official law. Next up is the judicial branch. The judicial branch is the branch that interprets the laws. So this is, part of the government is made up of the 9 Supreme Court justices, and their job is to look at laws to determine whether they are constitutional or not. So that is the power that they hold over the legislative branch. If they look at a law and they feel that it does not follow our Constitution, then they can send it back to Congress. The power they have over the executive branch is that they are appointed for life. And what that means is that they do not have to please anybody with their court decisions. They are not trying to make the president happy so that he will keep them in their position, They are appointed for life, and that is where they will stay until they decide to retire. Okay, the second page in your packet for Unit 1, Note 6, is this one where we're going to focus on some of the nitty-gritty details included in the Constitution regarding becoming a part of one of these branches. The first one we're going to talk about is the legislative branch. So you can see that it's broken into the House and the Senate, the two different houses of Congress. The number of members in the House is 435, determined by population. So out of those 435, each state gets a proportion based on how many people they have living in their state. The Senate, it's a little easier. Each state gets 2 senators, and we have 50 states, so that equals 100 senators. So total, we have 535 members of Congress. You can see the length of the terms of office: 2 years for the House, 6 years for the Senate. Both are elected. So unfortunately for those people in the House, they are running for re-election every 2 years. The senators are running every 6 years. Here's the age requirement: 25 years old to be in the House, 30 years old to be in the Senate, and you must be a citizen, although you didn't have to be born here. 7 years citizenship for the House and 9 years citizenship for the Senate. Now down below here, you can see some of the other powers. Besides just making laws, the legislative branch gets to decide how to spend our tax money. So when taxes are collected, they sit down and make a budget that they have to agree to on where the money is spent. A big portion of that money is spent on the military. So that is the number 3 here, where the legislature is in charge of raising an army. Financially speaking, they play a huge part in supporting our Army and our Navy and our Air Force and our Marines. And then declaring war. That's kind of a surprise to some Americans. I think many Americans believe that the president gets to declare war, but that's just not true. The Congress is in charge of declaring war officially. Let's move on to the executive branch. In the executive branch, there is one main person, although the president does not work alone. Certainly the president has the vice president and his advisors in the cabinet to depend on to help make decisions. The length of the term of office is 4 years. A president can run for re-election to make their term in office a total of 8 years. They are elected through the electoral process. They must be 35 or older to be president, and they must have been born in the United States. So they must be a natural-born citizen. Down below, we have some more of the powers of the president from being commander-in-chief of the armed forces, which is to say that the president is the top leader of our military. Of course, the president isn't involved in the daily running of the military. That's where our top Air Force and Marine and Navy and Army officials take their role, and then they meet regularly with the president to debrief him on situations around the world. The president also makes treaties with countries to establish relationships during peaceful times and after wars. The president also nominates ambassadors, which are the people who go to live in other countries and be kind of a liaison between the United States and that country. The president also nominates Supreme Court justices, which we talked about earlier, and they can grant pardons, which means that the president can excuse a person from a crime they've been committed of. Excuse me. And finally, the judicial branch. This branch is made up of 9 main people, the Supreme Court justices. They're appointed for life, and they have no age requirement and no citizenship requirement per the Constitution, which is kind of strange. But not just anybody could be a Supreme Court justice. That person has to be selected for the work that they have done and the work that they have in their career as a lawyer and as a judge before they would even be considered. Down here are some of the other powers of the judicial branch in terms of giving final decisions on court cases. They are the top court. Once they've made a decision on a case, it is not something that any other branch can change or any other person can change. They get to decide whether the laws and actions of the other 2 branches follow the Constitution. And they are essentially the protector of the Constitution, the supreme law of our land. So all of the work they do always refers back to the Constitution. All right, that's it for Note 6, Unit 1. Happy day, historians!